July 13th, 1976, was supposed to be a normal day at Graceland. Elvis's entourage, the group of friends and employees known as the Memphis Mafia, were going about their usual routines, keeping Elvis company, running errands, managing the endless details of his life. But that morning, three men received unexpected phone calls that would end decades of friendship and create a scandal that rocked Elvis's final year. Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler were fired, not laid off, not asked to resign, fired abruptly and without warning via phone calls from Elvis's father Vernon, who delivered the news with obvious discomfort. After years of loyal service, after decades of friendship in Red's case, they were out. Effective immediately. No farewell, no explanation from Elvis himself, just Vernon's apologetic voice telling them their services were no longer needed. The three men were devastated. Red West had known Elvis since high school, had been his friend and protector since before fame changed everything. Sonny West, Red's cousin, had joined the group in the early 1960s and become one of Elvis's most trusted bodyguards. Dave Hebler had worked for Elvis for 5 years, handling security and becoming part of the inner circle. And now they were fired, without even a conversation with the man they'd devoted years of their lives to protecting and supporting. The official reason, delivered by Vernon with obvious discomfort and reluctance, was financial. Elvis was struggling with money problems despite his massive earnings from concerts, records, and residual movie income. Colonel Parker's unconscionable 50% cut of everything, combined with Elvis's notoriously lavish spending habits and the substantial cost of maintaining his large entourage of friends and employees, meant cash flow was constantly tight and getting tighter. Something had to give to balance the books, and the three bodyguards' salaries, totaling over $100,000 annually, were an easy and immediate cut that Vernon could justify to the accountants. But the real reasons were far more complicated, more painful, and more deeply rooted in Elvis's deteriorating mental and physical state. Elvis had been increasingly paranoid and erratic due to his severe prescription drug addiction, which had progressed from manageable medication use to life-threatening polypharmacy involving dozens of pills daily. The Memphis Mafia members, particularly Red and Sonny West, had been trying desperately to control his drug use, to limit what unethical doctors prescribed, to intervene when Elvis was clearly taking dangerous combinations of medications that could and eventually would kill him. Elvis saw this not as help but as betrayal, as attempts to control him and limit his freedom. Red and Sonny West in particular had become increasingly vocal about their concerns. They'd confronted doctors who were prescribing excessive medications. They'd tried to talk to Elvis about getting real help for his addiction. They'd even discussed the possibility of forced intervention, though they'd never followed through. Elvis knew about these conversations. His other employees told him everything, competing for his favor by reporting on what the Wests were saying and doing. And Elvis, paranoid and defensive about his drug use, saw his oldest friends as enemies trying to undermine him. The firing was personal, vengeful even. Elvis had Vernon make the calls because he couldn't face doing it himself. He knew what he was doing was wrong, knew these men deserved better after years of loyal service, but his addiction and paranoia had warped his judgment beyond recognition. Red, Sonny, and Dave were in immediate and severe financial trouble. They'd been well paid by Elvis over the years, earning salaries that were generous by any standard, but they'd spent accordingly, maintaining expensive lifestyles that required steady, substantial income. They had mortgages, car payments, families to support. Suddenly unemployed with absolutely no warning, no severance package beyond a final paycheck, and no realistic prospects for similar high-paying employment given their very specialized skill set, they faced the real possibility of financial ruin within months. They tried desperately to reach Elvis, to talk to him directly face-to-face, to understand exactly what had happened and why, and potentially negotiate getting their jobs back or at least receiving proper severance and references. But Elvis refused to take their calls or see them in person. His remaining employees were given strict instructions to tell the fired men that Elvis didn't want to speak with them under any circumstances. The gates of Graceland were literally and figuratively closed to them. In desperation, born of genuine financial panic, Red and Sonny West approached a major publishing house with an idea that would change everything. They would write a book about their years with Elvis, an insider's account of life in the Memphis Mafia, the good times and the bad times, the truth about what was really happening behind Graceland's gates. The publisher was immediately and enthusiastically interested. Books about Elvis sold extraordinarily well to his devoted fan base, and a tell-all memoir from his former longtime bodyguards would be a guaranteed commercial bestseller worth substantial advance money. Dave Hebler joined the project as a third author, and they brought in experienced tabloid journalist Steve Dunleavy to help craft the narrative and handle the actual writing. The book would be called Elvis: What Happened, and it would reveal things about Elvis that had never been made public before, truths that had been carefully guarded secrets. His extensive prescription drug use and addiction, his violent outbursts toward employees and strangers, his increasingly erratic and unpredictable behavior, the dangerous combinations of medications that were consuming his life and threatening his health. The West cousins and Hebler wrestled with the decision for weeks before finally committing to the project. They still loved Elvis deeply, still considered him a friend and brother despite the abrupt firing and cruel rejection. But they were simultaneously angry at how they'd been treated after years of loyal, devoted service, hurt by Elvis's refusal to even speak with them or explain his decision, and desperately financially pressured with bills mounting and no income. And they convinced themselves, through long conversations, that maybe public exposure would actually force Elvis to get serious help, would create enough external pressure and family intervention for him to finally address his life-threatening addiction before it killed him. They told themselves they were doing this to save him, not to hurt him or profit from his pain. Elvis: What Happened was published in August 1977 by Ballantine Books with massive publicity and immediate controversy. The timing was incredibly and tragically significant. Elvis died on August 16, 1977, just days after the book hit bookstore shelves nationwide. Many people would later claim with conviction that the stress and deep humiliation of the book's shocking revelations about his private life contributed directly to his death, though there's no medical way to prove or disprove that connection definitively. The book was explosive and immediately controversial. It detailed Elvis's prescription drug addiction in clinical and disturbing detail, describing the countless pills he took daily from multiple doctors, the elaborate systems and deceptions for obtaining dangerous medications, the physical and mental deterioration everyone around him could see happening. It revealed violent incidents where Elvis had struck out at people in drug-fueled paranoid rages. It exposed the profound dysfunction of daily life at Graceland, the sycophants and enablers who cared more about their paychecks than about Elvis's declining health, the toxic culture of excess and indulgence that surrounded and ultimately destroyed him. But the book wasn't entirely negative. Red and Sonny West also wrote with obvious love and nostalgia about the good times, about the Elvis they'd known before fame and drugs corrupted everything. They included stories that showed his generosity, his humor, his genuine love for his friends and family. They made it clear they were writing not from hatred, but from a complicated mix of loyalty, hurt, and desperate hope that exposure might save him. Elvis's reaction to the book was devastation and rage. He learned about it weeks before publication, when advance copies started circulating. According to people close to him, Elvis cried when he read it. Then he became furious, threatening lawsuits, wanting to destroy the men who'd betrayed him. "How could they do this?" Elvis reportedly said to members of his remaining entourage. "After everything I did for them, after all the years, they're going to destroy me for money?" But Elvis also knew, in his more lucid moments, that everything in the book was true. He couldn't sue for libel because the claims were accurate. He couldn't deny the drug use because too many people knew about it. All he could do was feel betrayed and humiliated. Elvis died 2 weeks after Elvis, What Happened was published. His death turned the book from a tell-all expose into something much darker, the final testimony about a man spiraling toward his death, written by the friends who'd tried and failed to save him. Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler were consumed by guilt. They'd exposed Elvis's darkest secrets to the world, and days later he was dead. People blamed them, claimed the stress of the book had killed him, called them Judases who'd betrayed their friend for money. At Elvis's funeral on August 18th, 1977, the 3 fired bodyguards were not welcome. They weren't invited to the service at Graceland. They weren't part of the procession. They stood outside with thousands of other mourners, grieving for the man they'd known and loved, carrying the weight of knowing their book had been among the last things to hurt him before his death. Red West later said in interviews that writing the book was the biggest regret of his life. "We thought we were helping him," Red said in a 1989 interview. "We thought if the truth came out, if people knew how bad things were, someone would force him to get help. We never imagined he'd be dead 2 weeks later. I'd give anything to undo it." Sonny West expressed similar remorse. "Elvis was like a brother to me," Sonny said. "Firing us hurt, but we shouldn't have written that book. We should have found another way. The money wasn't worth what we lost." Dave Hebler was the least remorseful of the 3, maintaining that the book told important truths that needed to be told. But even he admitted that the timing was tragic, that if they'd known Elvis would die so soon, they never would have published. The publication of Elvis, What Happened created a debate that continues decades later. Were Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler betrayers who sold out their friend for money? Or were they desperate men who'd been unfairly fired and who genuinely believed exposure might save Elvis's life? Defenders of the book point out that everything in it was true. Elvis was addicted to prescription drugs. He was behaving erratically and violently. He was surrounded by enablers who cared more about their paychecks than his health. Exposing these truths might have been the last chance to force intervention before it was too late. Critics argue that no amount of truth-telling justifies publicly humiliating someone you claim to love, that real friends would have found other ways to help, would have kept trying to reach Elvis privately rather than exposing him publicly, that the book was motivated primarily by anger and money rather than concern. Priscilla Presley, Elvis's ex-wife, later said she understood why the book was written but wished it hadn't been. "They were hurt and angry and broke," Priscilla said in a 1985 interview. "I understand why they did it. But Elvis was hurt too, and he didn't deserve to be exposed like that. There were no winners in that situation." Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's daughter, has been more critical. "Those men were supposed to protect my father," she said in a 2003 interview. "Instead, they made money off his pain and his addiction. I'll never forgive them for that." Elvis, What Happened? Sold over 3 million copies and remains in print today. It's considered one of the most important books about Elvis, providing insider details about his final years that no other source could offer. Historians and biographers cite it extensively, treating it as a crucial primary source despite its controversial origins. Red West died in 2017 at age 81, carrying the guilt of the book to his grave. In his final interviews, he consistently said that knowing Elvis, being his friend for all those years, was the greatest honor of his life, and that writing the book was his greatest mistake. Sonny West is still alive as of 2024, now in his late 80s. He rarely gives interviews, but when he does, he always expresses regret about the book. "Elvis deserved better friends than we were in the end," Sonny said in a 2015 interview. "We failed him." Dave Hebler has been more private, avoiding most interview requests and rarely discussing his time with Elvis or the controversial book. The firing of Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler in July 1976 set in motion a chain of events that ended with Elvis's death 13 months later. Whether the book hastened the death is impossible to know. Whether the fired bodyguards were heroes trying to save their friend or betrayers capitalizing on his dysfunction is a question people still debate. What's certain is that friendship, when mixed with fame, money, addiction, and desperation, can create impossible situations where everyone loses. Elvis lost the friends who'd known him longest and cared about him most genuinely. Red, Sonny, and Dave lost their friend, their jobs, and their reputations. And the world lost Elvis at age 42, dying alone in a bathroom at Graceland, surrounded by the prescription drugs that his fired bodyguards had desperately tried to control. The book they wrote in desperation and anger became their permanent legacy, ensuring they'd be remembered not as loyal friends who served Elvis for years, but as the men who betrayed him for money when he fired them. Whether that reputation is fair or unfair is something each person must decide for themselves. But the tragedy is undeniable. A friendship that began in high school and survived decades of fame ended in mutual betrayal, public humiliation, and death.